In the 8th century BC, Rome was a volatile settlement of outlaws and outcasts. Ancient writers described the city as a patient in a high fever, a place that survived only through constant, aggressive warfare with its neighbors. Then, the city lost its warlike founder. While conducting a public sacrifice at Goat's Marsh, a violent thunderstorm rolled in. The crowd scattered in terror, and King Romulus simply vanished. Rumors immediately spread that the patricians had finally had enough and murdered him in the chaos. This sudden disappearance brought the city's deepest internal fractures to the surface. The original Roman settlers and the newly integrated Sabine population despised each other, and both factions demanded one of their own take the throne next. Rome was trapped in a paradox. The settlement needed a king to maintain order, but crowning another traditional warlord risked accelerating its slide into a bloody civil war. To prevent total collapse, the factions agreed on the highly unlikely compromise candidate, a Sabine named Noma Publius. He was an outsider known for strict discipline, deep philosophical study, and a distinct distaste for military conquest. When the ambassadors arrived to offer him the crown, Numa flatly refused it. He argued that his love of peace and quiet study made him unfit for the job. To him, leading a populace that required a military captain would make him a laughingstock. It took his father to change his mind. His father argued that accepting the throne was a divine duty. Rome had a dangerous, fiery temper, and the gods were calling on Numa to use his wisdom to moderate that fury. Numa finally relented and accepted the crown, but he traveled to Rome with a secret resolve. He intended to dismantle the city's violent foundations from the inside out. He was stepping into the ancient world's most volatile political arena, armed with sociology and a deep understanding of human nature. Numa's first act upon arriving in Rome was a shock to the system. He immediately dismissed the Celerus, the 300-man armed guard that Romulus used for protection. He told the Senate he refused to rule over people who distrusted him. But Numa understood his audience. He knew a superstitious public would never accept radical pacifist reforms from a mere mortal. Instead, he claimed his instructions were divine, whispered to him by a forest nymph named Egeria. With his authority established, he addressed the bitter tribal hatred between the Romans and the Sabines. Numa recognized that hard substances don't easily mix together in a solid lump, but if you crush them into a fine powder, they combine. He dissolved the old ethnic boundaries by dividing the entire population into new groups based strictly on their daily professions. He formed companies of musicians, shoemakers, and potters. Suddenly, a Roman and a Sabine were forced to work together at the same anvil and worship at the same trade altars. This reorganization targeted the root of tribal discord. By prioritizing shared economic interests over ethnic origins, Numa created a path for these rival groups to coexist without the need for constant violence. With the city unified, Numa turned to foreign policy. Rome's early economy relied heavily on aggressive border raiding, and Numa needed a legal mechanism to force restraint. He created the facials, a specialized class of peacekeeping diplomats. He passed a law making it illegal for any soldier or king to take up arms until these diplomats had exhausted every possible avenue for peaceful negotiation. To solidify these changes, Numa restructured the Roman calendar, using the measurement of time itself to influence the city's values. The original Roman year began with March, a month dedicated to Mars, the god of war. Numa inserted a new month at the very front of the year, physically pushing March down the timeline to demote the primacy of warfare. He named this new first month January, after Janus, the two-faced god of transitions. It served as a daily reminder of the city's transition toward a civilized future. By weaving these practices into the law and the calendar, Numa turned pacifism from a personal philosophy into a public institution. The results of these reforms were astonishing. The Temple of Janus featured heavy wooden doors that were traditionally left open during times of war. Under Numa's reign, for 43 consecutive years, those doors remained firmly shut. 0 civil wars, 0 rebellions, and 0 foreign conflicts. When Numa died at the age of 80, neighboring nations who had benefited from his diplomacy traveled to Rome to carry his bier alongside the citizens. Yet, Numa's masterpiece contained a fatal flaw. His sociological engineering was brilliant, but the system relied on the gravity of his own moral charisma to keep it running. Unlike other ancient powers, Numa left the education of children up to individual parents. He built no mandatory, systemic educational apparatus to instill his values of peace into the next generation. The moment he died, the system collapsed. The succeeding king mocked Numa's piety as cowardly. He threw the gates of Janus wide open, and the Roman military machine returned to its default state of conquest and slaughter. Numa's reign demonstrates how deeply culture and law can influence a society's instinct for violence. But it also reveals the inherent fragility of such a system. Without a way to pass those values to the next generation, a culture of peace is only as strong as the man who established it.